So I first encountered the ugly couple when I was first living in Chicago, about 6 years ago. But it didn't occur to me what had really happened until many years later. I was riding the bus, a long bus ride from my job at the time, a job I resented for being necessary. I had my purse on the seat next to me because I used to be the type of person who would put my purse on the seat next to me instead of holding it in my lap. I most assuredly carried a scowl smeared across my face, as was my custom at the time. It was winter in Chicago, and my misery was palpable. The ugly couple boarded the bus at Grace Street. Now, when I say ugly, I mean ugly. As the day you were born. As ugly as sin. As ugly as a toad, or in this case, two toes. Their ugliness made them ageless. They were 29 or 17, somewhere in the range of something. She, the ugly she had long, stringy, dirty blonde hair, looking that it would be less dirty if she actually washed it. Some of the strands stuck together, clumping, covered in something, I dared not guess what. Her long, stringy hair ran down past her shoulders, which were enveloped in a large, furry monstrosity of a coat. If I had known then to call her a hipster, I would have done so, with disdain. My eyes had been tracking the tacky coat, but then they beamed back up to her face. Her face. Her nose was large and knobbly, managing to be swollen and bony all at once. A wart or a rather large pimple adorned the tip, reminding me of that reindeer that nobody wanted until he could get them out of a jam. Her face was covered in red splotches, a mixing of acne and patchiness. Pockmarked was the word I used later to describe her to my boyfriend at the time, he who also scowled and laid his bag on the seat next to him. The ugly she had eyes, of course, but they were too close together, hovering and holding each other under the umbrella of her eyebrow, singular. My eyes flickered back down to her mouth, the kind of mouth that a child might draw badly onto a fish, wide, lippy, and cold. Her teeth weren't the sort of color I approved of, nor the shape I would have preferred. Funny thing about that mouth, though. The sides of her gargantuan flapper were pointed up towards her bulbous nose and mousy eyes. A smile on the ugly she's face. The source of her smile boarded the bus behind her. He, the ugly he was younger than she did, but he was just as ugly. As ugly as a sinful toad on the day it was born. He was slightly gawky, with the look of a tall person who was ashamed to be so. He stooped so as to avoid bumping up against the straps hanging from the bus's innards. His neck disappeared into his shoulders, giving him the look of a sickly vulture. Now, at the time, my compassion extended no further than myself, so when I looked at his face, I saw disgust. He was splashed different colors, his mostly black skin peppered with bursts of pale white like a human Dalmatian. In my age, I see now a skin disorder, a pigment deficiency of some kind, but at the time, I could see only disfigurement. His blotted Rorschach face was covered with acne that covered white or black skin with no bias. His large insecty eyes dominated his face, but they were focused only on the she. My silent snide description of the ugly couple made me chortle as they walked past and took a seat a few rows back. Thank God I'll never be that ugly, I thought. On the outside, anyway. They took a seat and whispered a little to each other for a little, and then she laid her head on his shoulder, and they rode on in serene silence. A full, rounding silence. Not the empty kind that I was so always desperately attempting to fill. My desperate attempts to fill silences on buses next to my he at the time were loud and void of content. I had this delusion, though, that I was so clever to strangers on buses, and those strangers would go home to their spouses and say, "I sat near the funniest girl on the bus today. She sat with a he, and they talked very loudly without looking at each other. How wonderful they must be." I carried that delusion at the time. Months later, the winter started to thaw, but I remained just as miserable and frozen. My purse firmly planted on the seat next to me, my brow furrowed, my scowl becoming a permanent fixture on my face. I was walking, this time on the west side, near where Austin and Fullerton meet, past a small park. My pace was fast, and my head was down like a linebacker. I heard laughter, a sour sound at the time, the laughter of other people. I looked up, and I was amazed to see the ugly couple. They were just as ugly as I had remembered, and just as happy. They held hands and smiled at each other as they moved past me, their ugliness shining in the sunlight, their ugliness, the thing they couldn't see on each other. I wondered, where were they going? Where they went, where they usually were. They were utterly indifferent to me and my judgments. My opinion on their faces had no bearing on their day. I wondered why I didn't feel like that. Why I and my he were constantly scrutinizing other humans, humans we didn't even know or speak to. Why didn't we have the happiness of the ugly couple? We weren't nearly that ugly on the outside. It took a few more years for me to realize that I had only known an ugly love and an ugly way to be in the world. I still sit on buses. I hold my purse in my lap now. I turn the corners of my mouth up towards my eyes, which I keep open and have removed the blinders. And I think about the ugly couple and how beautiful they were.